The quote from today's podcast that really stood out to me was, God gives you strengths and he gives you weaknesses, but he gives you strengths to overcome your weaknesses. Today, I'm really honored to tell the story of Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, formerly known as Chris Jackson. He's one of the premier marksmen in the history of the NBA that you may not know about. Some people say he was Steph Curry before Steph. I could quote Shaquille O'Neal, who says that watching him playing basketball was like watching God play basketball. They compare him to Steph because of his long-range shooting and accuracy. Well, his rebuilding story today is going from his childhood being characterized by poverty, raised in a single-parent family with two brothers, growing up with Tourettes Syndrome and not knowing what it was, but the difficulties of that and how that affected his basketball career. Going from that to being the third pick in the NBA draft, finding his faith in the Nation of Islam, and ultimately how his faith improved his discipline and helped him become a better player. But that's not what the full story is here. Today, we have Mahmoud and we have the director of the Showtime produced documentary, Stand. The director is Joslyn Rose Lyons, and they're going to give a never before heard story about how Mahmoud Abdul Rauf sparked controversy in the NBA during his career, where he refused to stand for the national anthem in a sign of protest. Some people say he's also Colin Kaepernick before Colin Kaepernick. This story is really powerful, and I'm really grateful to Mahmoud for sharing his story. That's what this podcast is about. I'm excited for you to hear this. Here we go. Rebuilding Mahmoud Abdul Rauf.
Hey guys, welcome to Rebuilding the Beast. I'm your host, Bessa Zazili, NBA player turned podcast host. And on this show, I'm going to have a lot of my inspiring friends come on to share with you their rebuilding journeys. I hope you can take the tips from their lives and apply it to your life as well. Oh, and don't forget to hit subscribe, like, comment, share with a friend. All the things. All right, I'll see you guys soon. Today on the podcast, we have Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, my brother. On the podcast, we have the director, Joslyn Rose Lyons. Do I say it properly?
That's fine. You can say Lyons. It like that.
And Leon, yes.
Absolutely. Whenever I say Siri, it's like Siri will say Joslyn Rose Lyon. I don't know. I think that's the place in France where that side of my family was from. But they say Leon. It's like Leon. But yeah, it's Lyons. So you can just call me Joslyn Rose.
Okay, so Joslyn Rose, the director of the documentary, which, by the way, I just watched this documentary last night, and I feel like it's going to touch so many people. Just telling your story in such a vulnerable way, Mahmoud. It takes a lot for a man, like I said to you before, a guy who played in the NBA. In our world, there is this idea of a machismo, as a way that you're supposed to be as a man. What made you so comfortable being able to be so vulnerable on camera and tell your story in that way?
Well, thank you for the question. A lot of things, actually. I mean, after becoming a Muslim man, a lot of things changed for me. Just my level of gratitude, my level of peace, but also just the importance of telling stories. And of course, there's some things, man, not everything is meant to share, but those things that you do share, you just want to be as raw as you can, because everybody has a story. And everybody's story is impactful in its own way. And we have a concept called Sadaqah Jariyah, which is like it's charity that you give constantly. And one of the ways that even in your death, like if you build a road, if you build a hospital, if you write a book, and even if you're dead for 50 years, 100 years, if somebody pick up that book and they can benefit from it or your story, and it could direct them in beneficial ways, then you're getting blessings even when you're dead and gone. So for me, it's important to be raw, to tell that story with all that comes with it, the vulnerability, the passion, the anger, so people can have a better visual what that looks like. And it's a beautiful thing too that, Jocelyn and I were able to team up and the crew, so many others that were involved in this project to manifest all of it. And on top of that, I've been telling this story. I've been fortunate to travel the world and speak. And some of my speaking engagements has involved telling pieces of my story. So the more you tell it, the more comfortable you get with telling it. And it's still hard, it's still hard because when you've gone through something in your life, still when you bring it up, I bring up my mother, I bring up certain conditions, man, the tears, fill up in my eyes because it's like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And so you get better, but at the same time, it's still impactful, to your soul or what have you. But the practice allowed me to be able to do it the way I did. Yeah.
You know what I wonder? I wonder if the more you tell your story, I wonder if you learn different things about yourself when you're telling your story.
For sure. There's always this moment, whether you're writing a book, you're telling your story, or even the documentary. You're like, hey, I wish I'd have said that. Wow, wish that would have been in there. Because you can't remember everything. But things come up, man, that you thought that you had totally forgotten. And it's therapy too. It's definitely therapy.
Ask, yes.
Yeah, therapy, man. Therapy. But you things come up and you're like, wow, man, I didn't even remember that. And which is why it's important for when people ask questions, because some people are great with getting things out on how they ask you certain questions that trigger certain ideas. And so you're right. Almost every time you learn something new about yourself, or you remember something that you thought you had forgotten.
It's funny. I had a professor in college, film professor, and he said, "You never finish a movie, you just abandon it." And it's this idea that you can't ever really be done with something. Like, we want to believe that there's a beginning, middle, and end because that's more comfortable. But there is no real ending. There's no perfect way to tell a story. I think my approach with filmmaking is to just be a vessel and get out of my own way and let the story come through. And that happened in Mahmoud's story. I mean, there was so many things that I thought, oh, I'll tell it this way. Like, we had this genealogist and we were searching for Mahmoud's biological father, and then we couldn't find him. But in doing that, I just kind of felt like, well, maybe when we're going back to Gulfport, we can have Mahmoud visit his mother's gravesite and we can film that. And there can be like a new level of something there that we get to see that we didn't get to see before, some sort of healing or peace, or, so there's things the story will tell you that it wants to say. And I think my job as a director is to just listen and hear what the story is asking me to tell, how to tell it, so.
That's a perfect segment, Joslyn, because now it's a perfect segue for us to go into the story. Let's go back. And before we even talk about your basketball career, Mahmoud, let's talk about your beginnings and growing up in Mississippi. Do you remember that part of your life?
Of course I do. It was a section of town called Sirius City, about 4 or 5 blocks from the beach. You're poor, but at the same time you don't, because you're in an environment in a neighborhood where everybody else have living the same as you. But you realize it when you step out, right? Different things are, but just growing up surrounded by those things, the poverty, the things that are people that grew up in the inner city or the ghetto. This is the poverty, the prostitution, the crime, the gangs, and all of that, and just having to navigate through that, man, and not having enough to eat a lot of times, not having like proper clothing, certain times of the year, and the frustrations with it. Growing up with a mother who had her limitations like everybody else, but educationally, formally, 8th grade education, and just what comes out of that. I talk a lot about how your environment molds and shapes who you are, people that you surround yourself with, the environment that you're in, the things that you're constantly consuming. And no matter how tough we think we are, right? Oh, that stuff don't affect me. I don't care who you are, however older, that stuff affects you the more you're surrounded by that. And so growing up, not having the confidence academically, right? And how you see yourself as an individual, right? And it was fortunate that I found basketball, because growing up without a father, not seeing academics as a way out for me, feeling like, man, this is not for me. Like, I'm not good at this. I don't know what my life would have said for itself if basketball didn't end up being what it was. And so, yeah, I remember it vividly. But at the same time, I'm grateful that I went through that experience.
So it took you till 17 to be diagnosed. But before then, you had something that the doctors called habits. And eventually that thing would go away. Can you really describe to people who don't know what Tourette's syndrome is and how that affected you?
Yeah, Tourette's syndrome, man, it's like your mind and your body on two different waves. It's sending messages and they just don't agree, right? Mm-hmm. Your mind is telling you, touch this piece of wood, right, with your two fingers. And it has to feel this way. And every time you touch it, most of every time you touch it, right, it's saying it wasn't perfect, right? It didn't feel right. And so you have to keep doing that over and over again. And this was like from the moment you wake up, you get out the bed, you sit back down, you get out because it doesn't feel right. You know, the way you sit or the way you stand, putting your socks on, taking them off, your shoes on, taking them off. So just to get out the house sometimes at that age, it may take about 45 minutes just to get out. You open the door, close the door, open the door, close the door. Because your mind is playing tricks on you. Say, if you don't finish this the way I want you to finish it, I'm going to make your day miserable. It's like you're going to be off center. Your tics are going to exacerbate because now you know you didn't finish that objective. And so it carried itself into basketball. And it usually things that you care about. And it's almost like you hear about women having hormonal issues. Like they'll talk about, well, if I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm anxious. Tourette's is that way. If I'm anxious, sad, nervous, it exacerbates the symptoms. And I got to work really hard to try to level them off, but they never are leveled off unless you're asleep or unless I work myself almost to near death. And there's that moment when I'm breathing and then it slows down and maybe 15 seconds, a minute, 40 seconds, there's a level of total peace that I live for. But outside of that, it's something that you have to navigate through every second of the day, trying to keep a balance with yourself. So this is Tourette's syndrome. And from the moment I woke up until the moment I went to sleep, you have to navigate through this world of, you know, at least mentally seeking perfection. You know, and I don't care how hard I hit this piece of wood. And that hurt my knuckles. But if it doesn't feel right, I gotta keep and I might have to do it 20 times until my mind and my body on the same wavelength. Then I can move to something else. But I may come right back to that. And this is with so much. Reading a book may take a page 15 minutes because it doesn't roll off my lips right, or it didn't roll off my mind right. Then finally, when those two things are there, I didn't understand it. So I got to go back until all of those pieces roll off my lip. It comes off my mind right, and I comprehended it, which is why they ended up putting me in special education in junior high school, because it took me so long, not because I was incapable, and so that's Tourette's syndrome. It
almost sounds like a form of OCD.
It has that in it for sure. OCD is a major component of Tourette's syndrome. Yep.
And that actually, one of the doctors was explaining that in the film about how the OCD that Mahmoud's Tourette's syndrome has as one of the symptoms is one of the greatest strengths that Mahmoud has on the court, shooting free throws where it's just like the repetition and the need for perfection and the continuity of that over and over again actually lended itself to Mahmoud's skill and gift. And I love to believe, and I've experienced it in my life, and I've seen it in Mahmoud's journey and so many others, that often the thing that we think is a detour or makes us outcasted or feels like a deficiency, those are sometimes just a kind of like signpost for us to just keep going a certain way. Like they're guiding us. Like God gives us these things that we might feel like, why do I have to live with this? Like, I've always had anxiety. Like, why do I have this? Well, if you look at it as a gift, it's actually guiding you to your purpose. Like, it helps you align. And I think Mahmoud's story, like, really shows that. And when Mahmoud was just talking about that peace that he finds, like, in those moments of where he's pushed himself to the point of exhaustion, like, I really found that in the film and wanted to pull it out, because I think we can all relate to, there's moments in our lives that we live for where we find that peace, whatever that peace is, like freedom from the thing that's hard for us to integrate into our lives. Like, that's those moments we want them more and more. We want that peace. So there's a moment in the film, Fess, you probably saw it when you watched it last night, where Mahmoud explains that those moments on the court, on the basketball court, where you know that peace is present.
You said something, and I hope I can interject. That's something that I was blessed with early on, from my grandmother and uncle and aunt. I always believed in a higher power, right? And they would always tell me that God gives you strengths and He gives you weaknesses, but He gives you strength. This is how they expressed it, but He gives you strengths to overcome the weakness, and it's up to you, right, to figure out the one you're going to focus on the most. And so I would, even at that young age, I knew better than to, yes, you have those days, I'm tired of this, I'm tired of going to it, because it's hard. But you also revert back daily. It's like whenever you think of one thing, there's 2, 3, 4, 5 things to be grateful for. Because what you focus on grows, right?
Right.
And so even at that age, I knew that, you know what, I had a level of belief. It wasn't always strong. There were days it fluctuated, but you know what? God, you wouldn't give me a burden that I can't bear. You gave this to me because you know I can deal with. You trying to teach me something. You're trying to elevate me. You know, and so I always tried to revert back to that as much as possible. Actually, Malcolm Gladwell has a phenomenal book called David and Goliath, and he talks about how we perceive advantages and disadvantages. And in the book, he uses David and Goliath. And oftentimes people will look at Goliath, say, well, who had the advantage? Goliath, he was a giant, he had armor on, but then he started breaking it down. He said, well, okay, he had armor, but the armor was heavy. He wasn't as agile. He had 2 weapons, but he could only use them in close, right? But David mastered that slingshot. He was agile. He became a marksman. Then you start, hold on, actually, David had the advantage. And so he started talking about dyslexia. We often look at this and we call it a disability. And then that holds us back. Yeah, it challenges. It makes life tough. But just like Joslyn said, you know, and there's this saying that blows that don't break your back strengthen it. They've done studies that people with these types of conditions and even dyslexia, how many inventions that they've created that benefit the world. And so if you gravitate to it and embrace it for what it is, like this is a test like anything else. It's like being poor, not having money, or having money and still being humble, right? Everything's a test. Then you'll get what you're supposed to get out of it. Because I don't think God puts you in a position to where He's trying to break your back. He's trying to elevate you. You just can't see it. And so at a young age, I always had that philosophy. And the older I got and the more I read and the more I paid attention, I said, you know what, there's a system to this, right? And because if it wasn't for Tourettes Syndrome, I don't think I'd be the person that I am today, right? I don't think I'd be the basketball player, because Lil Chris Jackson wanted to stop after about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
That's what I want to know.
Tourettes said, no, you ain't done. You gotta satisfy me. And while you're tired, you're about to fall out and die, you gotta make 10 shots. All of them gotta be all nets. No glitches in the move prior to making the shot. If you skim the rim on the last one and you made 9 in a row, you can't take that shot again and say, oh, we're going back. That's 10. No, you got to start back at 0. So that might take another hour and a half.
I want people to understand what you just said, because when I heard that part of the story, I said, that's insane. Because now this is the end of your workout. I got to leave, but I got to make 10 swishes. But not only 10 swishes, kind of like you said with the book, I got to make 10 swishes where I'm going hard, full speed, and I can't have glitches in the moves. Do you know how many different barriers to that there is? First of all, you got to make 10, not just swishes. You got to make 10. Then you got to make swishes. Then you got to make the moves and do it hard. So you already tired. And then you got to do it without glitches. That's insane, man. And I can see how that could make you a good basketball player. But that's also like that. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been.
Professors, after that, this is what almost killed me, David. I'm walking off the court. If I mess up about 3 times on my dribble, I have to back up. I'm under the goal again. And my brain is saying, shoot it. But I'm like, I don't want to shoot it. And when I take that shot again, it don't feel right. That same 10 shots, I got to do that 2 times back to back. So I had to develop a strategy. I said, man, if I keep doing this, I'm going to die. I know I am. So after I would finish that rep of 10, after the first hour and a half, 2 hours.
They got to roll you out the gym. Come on.
No. I did a lot of that at outside court. I would have to take the ball out the net and I would throw it towards my house. That way, when I got the ball and as I'm dribbling, if I mess up and I back up 10 steps or 3 steps, I was too far from the goal to have to shoot it again to do that 3 times in a row. And so I started to have to find ways I have to find ways mentally to make adjustments because I won't leave this place. And I know it's going to kill me because, I mean, it was times when I couldn't catch my breath because I couldn't stop. The very point that I would stop, I have to start over because I'm cheating. And so I couldn't catch it and tears would fall down and it would scare me every single day almost. And I said, man, I'm going to kill myself. And I had to start making adjustments. And so that's the challenges of it. And like anything, that Tourette's is bigger than basketball. Bruce Lee had a story about carryovers. He said, everything we do in life have carryovers. Mm-hmm. And so even when you think about, and I know we're not there yet, but the decisions that were made, so all of those things add up, right? To say, okay, same old thing, I got to do this or I ain't going to feel comfortable.
Wow. I didn't think about it that way. But before we even get to that later part, did you ever feel like your Tourette's syndrome and with that diagnosis that it would affect your game, that you wouldn't be able to play basketball the way you want to, whether it's, in professionally or in college?
Actually, no, I didn't. And I'm happy I didn't. I'm happy that I didn't think that way because if I did, I wouldn't have pursued it the way I did. Right. I was dumb enough to think that I could make it.
We all have to be there. That's kind of like, you all have to have some kind of you have to be a little bit irrational to think that you can make it professional in basketball. Because like I said before, it's 1% of 1%. So what makes you so different? And my story is the same, where I came from Nigeria and I just started playing and I just I just wanted to be in the gym. So when I start hearing your story of being in the gym and I got to make 10 before I leave, I'm like, man, did I just not understand that I had some form of the same OCD? I don't want to put myself in your story, but that's what your documentary makes it that relatable.
No, but everybody has a story. In all of our stories, we can find parts in it that's similar, to our life. So no, that's perfectly fine. I can't remember what you said to respond.
How the documentary makes it relatable, because I felt like that's the same way I was in the gym. Like, I got to make 10 before I leave. Oh, then I didn't make it. I got to do it again. And that's, for me, it made me a better player because I started super late. I was 16 years old when I started, so that was part of my story.
Coming from Nigeria, though, man, look, you have a different type of struggle because you're not in this circuit. So you have to do what you do and hope that somebody, sees you and the news get back from way over from Africa, to be able to, so that's a whole different struggle, man, I'm sure.
That was a different story. But I want to hear, there's a part of your documentary where you talk about you saw the KKK marching. How did racism affect your life, or how did this show up in your life?
Oh, wow. I mean, unfortunately, racism is everywhere. It's in the school system. It's in the job market. It's, you know what I mean? It's in the neighborhoods you walk through. It's everywhere, unfortunately, especially in this country. But for me, man, that was literally an eye opener. You know, you already, because I grew up and I would see just the way that, you're taught when you have to communicate with white folks to play the game, right? Because they control, right, what happens to you when it's all said and done. If you want to break it down to the nuts and bolts of the conversation, right, they control it. And so when I saw the KKK at that age marching, a lot of things went through my head. The fact that an organization such as this, with its notorious history, are allowed to parade themselves on the beach like that publicly. Then another part of it was like, wow, it makes you more cautious and confused and concerned, because now you have people that aren't brave enough to share their views openly without wearing that mask. So you're wondering, is it somebody that you know? So now when you're walking around, even more so, you don't know who to believe, who to trust and who to believe in, right? Because you don't know who's under those masks.
Yeah, wow.
And so it's very hard, especially in Mississippi with its history. And this is why I was blessed, man, I'm telling you, because there's so much politics in almost everything that we do. And even at that young age, it's almost like, what is it, Brer Rabbit? You've been taught to play dumb to get ahead. You know what I mean? And it's like, hey, don't let them know, give them for example, coming out of high school, they say, hey, always keep a Mississippi school on your list, even if you don't want to go. Because I never wanted to go to Mississippi school. But they said, if they don't see that on the list, you still have to get through your high school. They will turn on you and they'll make your life miserable, right? And so I had to do stuff like that at that age. And so seeing those things and at that time too, you got Roots coming on TV. You got all of these programs. And then going into high school, and I know we're jumping a little bit, but this is all part and parcel of it. I almost wasn't ranked and recognized as a top guard in the nation because Mississippi had a rule. And I'm still bitter to this day. And I don't know if they've changed it. I would imagine they have. When I was coming out, my mother didn't have money to send me to camps. Nike, I missed a camp in South Carolina. It was a prestigious camp also, because the letters were coming to the assistant coach at the high school, not the head coach, but they were both in cahoots. And they weren't giving me my letters. They gave me the ones they wanted me to have. Right. So I missed that camp. So it got back to Dr. Dunn through Miss January, who was a close friend of mine. She's no longer living, may God rest her soul. And I found out I was invited to the Princeton Nike camp. And there was a deadline I had to meet. And that's when I found out I didn't get my letter. And so I was a quiet dude. I didn't really like certain kinds of confrontation, especially with authority, because you're conditioned to be that way. But that was another issue for me. I'm like, oh, you messing with my livelihood now. So I had to sit down with the head coach, and I informed him of what I found out that they were doing. He said, well, you can get just as much publicity in Mississippi than you can. I said, man, that's crazy.
That's not your decision in the world.
You got 110 of the top players in the nation, coaches from all over the country. No way I'm going to get that notoriety in Mississippi. Mississippi had a rule that I had to pay my own way or I would be ineligible to play high school. My mother didn't have that money. And then, so Dr. Dunn had to inject $1,000 and something, whatever dollars, or 2, 3, whatever, into my mother's account. So now I'm invited. Nike's going to pay for it for free. But Mississippi said I had to pay for it. Then once I paid for it, they said, you can't bring any paraphernalia back or you'll be ineligible. I said, so that's a system designed to keep us back. So you learn early, like, wow, man, y'all are really terrible. Terrible. And I carried a chip on my shoulder the whole time. And still even to this day.
And even when you talk about NIL and other things that are happening now, like I know you went to LSU and everybody probably asking you, like you probably got the bag, right, to go to LSU. And I watched all your interviews and you're like, nah, I wish I did, But no, you didn't get paid. Why did you choose LSU?
I chose LSU. Well, one, man, I definitely would have loved to have gotten paid, but and I know people were getting paid, but I was also a little, I was a little scared because I'm like, man, I don't want something like that to happen. They never offered me anything either, but even if they would have, because other schools were offering them, I was just scared because I said, man, I don't want it to mess up my eligibility, right?
Mm.
And when I have to sit out, then you won't see me play. And so LSU came in, unlike other schools, man, and they just basically, it's like old school shaking hand type of thing. They say, listen, we have fair service. He was a McDonald's All-American out of high school. He was a first team freshman. And you'll be playing either alongside of him, y'all going to compete. I said, no, no problem. And they said, if you got what it takes, you'll play. I like that. I know there's favoritism in everything. There's healthy and unhealthy. That's why you got a starting five and a second string,
Just
right?
give me my
But I think it all
opportunity.
should be based on production, not what grade you're in, how old you are. So when they said that to me, I felt, man, this is a place that is fair, right? It's about getting out there and making it work, and you'll play. And I shook their hands and I said, I can't say it now because of the condition that's going on in the state of Mississippi, but I'm coming to LSU. And I started talking to Coach Cars. We talked, man, for hundreds of hours. And 90-some% of our conversations had nothing to do with basketball.
Mm.
Those things is what did it for me.
Wow. Yeah, as a young kid, you need that. You need that role model. You need that fatherly figure. Joslyn, as I was watching the documentary, there's a lot of great clips from high school, great clips from college, and really told the story so well. What was it like, finding all these clips? And was it hard to find the clips on Mahmoud?
Yeah, I mean, we had an amazing team of producers on this project, and the producers and the whole team put a lot of time into finding all of these clips for me to go through. My editor and I had a very dense first pass at post. There was just so much of Mahmoud and so much to choose from, and yeah, it was a really incredible archival look back. Like the NBA footage was just
What was
there
it?
was
Is it
so much.
cassette? Is it cassette tapes?
These were all kinds of old formats. I mean, VHS, and yeah, I mean, we had to deal with
Wow.
resolution quality issues on a lot of the footage because it was, you can see a lot of it's old, and but
You don't have to
yeah,
say it like that, Josh.
yeah, not that old,
I just,
not
but
Yeah,
ancient.
you put a lot of
But
emphasis on the word OLD.
well, I was just trying to bring to light that
well,
this is an archival. Was a lot of it was archival, but not that old. Yeah, this is
I
90.
mean, but for you, Mama, what was it like watching these old clips too? Like, what was it like watching the clips of you playing in college, playing in high school? So I'm assuming you probably saw some of them for the first time while she was retrieving them.
Well, a lot of my, some of them, a few of them, I haven't seen in a long time. But a lot of them I have seen, especially in this digital age of YouTube and all of those things. You see a lot, but it definitely bring back memories. You know,
Mm.
going through looking at those images, uh, even with the media and what was going on then with all the other issues that ended up becoming uh, a big deal in my career. But uh, yeah, man, it definitely bring back memories. Definitely.
So you grew up not knowing who your father was, and your mom wouldn't tell you. Did that burden you? Did that, because I also read and I saw a clip of you playing in, I want to say it was Mississippi State, where they were chanting, "Who's your daddy?"
Yeah.
I played in the SEC, and I understand how brutal and how crazy it can get. But talk to me about that experience.
Yeah, I had my days. Again, thing that got me through everything and still do, man, is just my faith in God and to know that He doesn't give me a burden I can't bear. So I'm
Mm.
always reverting back to that when I go through some difficult challenges. So even at that age, man, I would have my days, man, I'm questioning my mother. And out of all of our children, I mean, out of all of her children, I'm the only one, even to this day. She's passed now. May God bless her soul.
R.I.P.
But that she never told me who he was. And so it leaves you confused and guessing because my other two brothers knew. And one of their fathers were white. And it wasn't until it wasn't until Denver that she told me he's a white guy. And that's all she gave me until she died. And I didn't want to pursue it anymore because I didn't want her to think when she was on her deathbed that knowing that information was more important than what she was going through. So I let her die with it. But I had my moments, man. But on top of that too, just that faith and that chip on my shoulder, like every day you wake up, it's like, man, I'm going to I'm gonna take that as fuel to drive me.
Yeah.
But there were moments, man, where it would hit me so hard because as a young boy, who doesn't want to know their father, right? And I would work so hard. Some of those days, my motivation would be working so hard to where I hope that I become so great that whoever this man is, that they want to introduce themselves and become a part of my life so I can at least know who they are. You know what I mean? And so that was also a part of that motivation. So it was, again, you have your days when it's bad and you have your days when you take it and you say, hey, life goes on. We're taught that. We're taught, like even with injuries, fight through it, right? This is our culture. So even mentally, we're taught to do the same thing. So, yeah.
And I think Festus, we talked about this once, but there is I think that naturally, like when you're strengthening a muscle you're working out, it's like the resistance is what makes you stronger in working out physically. The resistance is also on a mental level, usually what makes you want to go the other way. Like we naturally just want to get away from the resistance because that's where the pain is, usually is where the resistance is. But there is this book that I read a while ago that Mahmoud's story it reminded me of this book when I was working on the film and directing it, it was called The War of Art. So not the art of war, but it talks about the closer you are to your dream, your purpose, your unmanifested vision in life. Like the closer you are to that, when you're at the threshold, like at the crossroads of that, the more intense the resistance will be. And so we often go the other way when we feel that, but actually what's right beyond that resistance is actually more of where we're supposed to be. It's like our purpose. And I think Mahmoud's story is such a representation of that journey. And obviously, Festus, you've gone through rebuilding that yourself. It's like those moments you almost are dying. Part of you has to be left behind so that you can go on and start another level of whatever it is that you're supposed to be doing. So I bring that up because that War of Art kind of idea is like Mahmoud's journey to me is like this. There's all this resistance, whether it was the Tourettes or the media or, not knowing his biological father. Like these were these really great struggles, but Mahmoud's strength just kept coming through, and the courage that I was able to show people, hopefully through the film, is just so inspiring to me to see that.
It's funny because I was listening to TD Jakes preach about this, and he was talking about how new levels bring new devils. And as you keep working towards something, it's like the devil doesn't tempt somebody who's not doing something, right? If you're at home not doing anything, then it leaves you alone. And so that's the idea. Now, you are the third pick in the NBA draft. But before we even get to that, 30 points a game as a freshman in college is crazy. Like it's not even, that's nuts. In college, averaging 20 points a game you're the best scorer in the country. 30 points as a freshman is nuts. And I can't talk about that without talking about you playing with Shaq your second year. Shaq, Stanley Robinson, but everybody knows Shaq. And what was that college experience like for you? Because I know you also talked about the more success you got, the more fear started to creep in that I can't start having this good thing without something else. What else is going to come and attack me or take this thing away?
Yeah. So the first question I think was about how was the college experience.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful for me. Uh, I still look back at that and I pinch myself. Uh, you know, technically being, they list you as 6'1", but I'm technically without shoes on 5'11" and a half.
Oh man, you were one of those guys that you had the NBA height in college.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
added a couple inches.
Well, no, they do that. I didn't do that. I mean, they used to mention. So, but you know what, man? I remember telling someone, Kent Lowe, the media guy at LSU, when he asked me, "What do you want your career to say?" I said, "Man, if I can average 13 points, give or take 7 assists, because I'm thinking like, okay, that's reasonable, right? But at the same time, my vision is bigger. But you can't always share your vision with people. They might try to talk you out of it, think you're arrogant. And man, I'm telling you, the game became easy. I mean, it was easy for me. I was blessed to just work hard, like religiously, imagining two, three invisible people guarding me on a consistent basis, always trying to play older people, living with the game, dissecting it in my head. It was a lifestyle for me. So for things to happen the way they did, like wow. And it drew me back to the court even more because you played. So when you have a great game, you want that feeling all the time. Right. So
Absolutely.
if you're that type of player, you're gonna get back in the gym, you're gonna work harder because you know that the target is on your back. But also you want that feeling all the time. And so man, that first year was like after that second game of 21 is when Dale said, "We need you to score more." So I'll try.
The green light?
Huh?
Oh, the green light. That's every basketball player's dream. We need you to score more. Say less, coach.
Yeah. But still you that's a lot of pressure too though. Because you have to balance it all. Like you don't want to just shoot to the point of, even though sometimes it may seem that way, but to where you take everybody out of the game too. Right? And so it has to be a balance. And he trusted me with that, and I appreciate it. I was always trying to be conscientious. That's why when I look back at my career, any time that I scored a lot of points, like you hear people, oh, they scored 80, they scored 70, but they blew the team out, right? Every time I scored a lot of points, it's because we needed it. It's not because we have a blowout, or he went for 50, but we beat him by 30. No, it was a as needed, moment. And I pride myself on that. But it was a great experience, man. Great experience. And when Shaq came the next year, I'm a sophomore, he's a freshman.
Now you gotta tell me the real story, man, because I heard y'all weren't rocking with each other.
Well, just like anything, man, you might play well with your teammates, but you have your cliques within the team, the people that you hang with a little bit more than others. For me, it was never, I don't think it was, well, I can't speak on his behalf, but it was never personal, like because I didn't like anyone. It was like, hey, this just happened to be who I hang with.
Yeah.
But on the bus, on the plane, in practice, we all got along. We did have an incident in a game when he felt I deliberately missed him. Right, and he came at me, and then I said something back. We went to talk to Coach Brown, and Coach Brown basically told him, "This is Mahmoud's team. Get it off the glass if you want." Right, and I just told him, "Look, there's a way you got to approach me. I respond to, if it's reasonable, it makes sense. But if you come at me strong arming me, that ain't ever gonna work. I'll keep the ball away from you just to teach you a lesson. You can't intimidate me like that, and then give it back to you once you learn." But yeah, it was but that first year, actually, I was overweight about 20 some pounds, because beginning of my high school, I was 155 pounds. Beginning of my senior year, but they put me on Haldol, and that Haldol, when you weren't practicing, it always made you thirsty, hungry, and sleepy. So I was like, the beginning of my high school, I was 155. My senior year, we played like 41 games a year in high school. And so I'm playing most of the minutes. So I ended up being like 172, 175 at the end. And then when I got to LSU, I was 185.
Wow.
So I'm like, wow, I did all of that on Haldol. I wonder if I would have been my body weight
still
now.
moving.
You were still
Right, right.
moving at 185.
Yeah.
That was I watched the clips. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's still getting busy. And you were 30. What I mean, what else you gonna do?
But this is why I say I still pinch myself because I was out of shape.
Mm.
You know what I mean? I was on Hal Dog. That was only by the grace and mercy of God, man. I couldn't have wrote that myself, you know. And I found out through one of the I think producers on the team who has Tourettes Syndrome. What's his name, Jonathan?
Mason Gordon.
Mason Gordon. And when he told me this, I mean, I don't, I always try to carry myself with humility, but I almost reached back and patted myself on the back when he told me. He said, "Do you know what Haldol was?" I said, "No." He said, "That's a psychotic drug. They give it to prisoners and people psychopaths to put them to sleep, to like zombies." I said, "Are you serious?" I said, "Man, it's a blessing that I didn't know that because that would have probably affected my perception."
Yeah.
Right. I said, "Wow, that's deep."
All this
Going back to sorry, Spence. I was going to say, going back to Shaq, he talked a lot in when we interviewed him about his professional jealousy of Mahmoud. And it was really interesting to hear him talk about it and how he would like watch Mahmoud and practice, like he really wanted to study him. But ultimately, one of my favorite sound bites from the whole movie came from Shaq. He said that it was like watching God play basketball when he watched Mahmoud. And I remember when the interview was done, I said, "Shaq, can you just go back and talk about that one more time? Like, what did that mean to you? Like watching God play basketball?" And it kind of goes back to the Tourettes syndrome. Like Mahmoud's OCD allowed this kind of superhuman ability to shoot in a way that's like godlike. It's like, it's really, you don't see that normally, someone who can shoot that way. So yeah,
it's really incredible, and it really led to Shaq is one of the greatest players of all time, and he gives you that compliment constantly on TV, everything. He says this guy was Steph Curry before Steph Curry became Steph Curry, and you were the third pick in the NBA draft, which is an incredible success, especially after being diagnosed with this thing. And I see the letter. There's a letter from a doctor that says, "Oh, he's okay to play," and all the teams you shot up the charts. So, did that come with more pressure? Now you're the third pick in the draft. You're lottery. That means that you got to carry a franchise, kind of. That's what a third pick in the NBA means. You go to a team that's not doing so well.
It carries enormous pressure, but also, man, mixed with just getting a lot of info. I was receiving a lot of bad information. Now, this is a new era now. You have even elementary players got trainers now, right? And we didn't. I never had a trainer per se. I just went out and used my imagination. And when I was coming out of LSU, I got some bad information. Man, you got to be bulky, you got to be bigger, right?
Oh, wow.
And I ended up gaining weight the wrong way, and I came out like I did at LSU the first year, but it was worse. And the circumstances, as you know, man, just being in a system, systems matter. You can have great skills, but if you're not in the right system, people are not going to see it. And a part of that was my fault, but yeah, it was a huge pressure. And on top of that, Doug Moe was the one that drafted me. Then they fired Doug Moe. And so now Bernie Bickerstaff comes in and he hires Paul Westhead. Truth be told, Paul Westhead did not want me. I'm convinced he didn't want me on the team. And it happens like that sometimes. Even with guys in college, they recruited, they get rid of a coach back then. Another coach come in, he's got his own set of people he wants to play.
Oh, yeah.
And so I went through that frustration because that was the first time in my basketball life where I had to deal with, it seems, somebody not wanting me on the basketball court. And so it was tough to navigate through that, right? I'm like, I had to, it was uncomfortable. You know what I mean? And it didn't feel good. And
it's for a minute, funny, though.
I'll have this pouting mentality.
Yeah.
And then I had to get past that and say, no, I'm feeding into this. I got to go to work because I'm giving them what they want, probably. Yeah.
as a freshman or as a rookie rather in the NBA, we all go through that period where we don't play because it's like, rookies don't play, right? And we all go through the moment of, am I gonna make it or am I not gonna make it? Because I never dealt with, because everybody who played in the NBA was a star where they came from. And then you get in as a rookie and now you're not playing. And it's like I know I can help this team win. That's why I'm here. But why am I not playing? And so what was it you were struggling with at the time? Because I know you also talked about, struggling with your faith during that period and just searching.
Yeah, I was struggling with my faith. I was struggling with coming to a entirely new city with
Mm-hmm.
weather that I wasn't accustomed to, being in the snow and the gloominess, right, that comes with being in an environment like that. I was struggling with the fact that this was my first time having to figure out, finding a place, uh, uh, organizing bills, where to, go, all of those things that come with being a grown up. And
Yeah.
then you got to also concentrate on playing basketball. You don't have your family there. And then you have a coach that don't necessarily want you. You're out of shape because you got bad information. And then the more out of shape you are, your Tourettes syndrome acts up even that much more. And it seems like people just don't give a damn, right? Because we're paying
Mm-hmm.
you, and it's not like that system where, what can we do? We want to help you out. You're a man now. Suck it up. Make it
Figure it
work.
out.
Especially at that time. It wasn't like now NBA have programs for people who, and it's good and bad because sometimes people can take advantage of the system by everything is a mental health issue, right? It's mental illness. But even then, more so to come out like that, and you say, man, look, I'm struggling, man. I'm having difficult navigating and doing all of this. What?
They didn't want to hear that.
You look like a chump,
Hmm.
right? So I was dealing with all of that stuff and all of that stuff.
Who were you leaning on during this time? Who's helping you through it all?
Man, I would pray, but man, look, man, some of my stuff I was leaning on food. I was leaning on relationships,
Mm.
whether it be a woman or so that I was with, finding relaxation and peace in that. And then I was, relying on, there was a guy named Dion Fortenberry that I ended up flying out to stay with me real close that, we would talk religiously, outside of practice, so those are some of the people. And my first wife at the time before we got married or when we got married, I was leaning on her too. Um, but I was seriously still at that moment very close to giving it all up because I was literally mentally I was depressed. I mean, I'd never felt that depression ever in my life, and I was trying to count my coins. Like, man, could I take this back and make it work in Mississippi? You know what I
Mm.
mean? And
Yeah.
so it was a real struggle, man. A real struggle.
In 91, you converted to Islam. Later down the line, you changed your name legally. Tell us about how you found your faith and what it means to you.
Well, make a long story short, man, going through struggles, asking questions, getting the same answer. You just got to believe. You can't question God. I get the autobiography from Dale Brown of Malcolm X. The light bulb came on. I'm like, wow, who is this? I want some of what he has. And go to Denver, still in contact with, people in Christianity and having those conversations. One dude named Mark James brought up Islam. We went to the masjid, picked up the Quran, came back 2, 3 pages later. It's like what was in those 2, 3 pages, it was like so solid
Mm.
that I didn't have any questions. Like I knew that this was it. And that's what did it for me. And I embraced Islam. And from that point on, that was the first time in my life that I began really focusing on educating myself, unlike before, because I had to read the Quran during Ramadan. And I didn't know that it wasn't obligatory. I thought it was obligatory. So I'm struggling. And then when I got through with it, you begin to have conversations with people. And you see that a lot of people have similar views. And that builds confidence. And then the confidence builds courage. And then the courage is like, I got to do something. I just can't go out with the only thing a person remember of me is, oh man, he had a quick release and he can play basketball.
Mm.
And so that's in a nutshell, like the quick version, how it all began to come together for me.
It's funny, Mahmoud, it sparked this thought that sometimes we pray for something, like we pray for a quality or an attribute in our lives, but we don't always realize that the way to get that quality is we have to walk through fire. Like sometimes we pray to be strong, like, oh God, please help me to be strong. And then suddenly we're going through something really hard. We're like, wait, God, I was asking for strength, not for weakness. And then we get through that hard time and we're like, oh, that hard time was the gift God was giving us because we prayed for strength. And that's how you build strength. Just like you said, that's how you build courage. Like sometimes we go through these things and they're actually part of our prayer towards the thing we're praying for. It just, in the moment, it's hard for us to see it when we're in it. So you just sparked that.
One of my least favorite prayers is praying for wisdom, because that one, you don't want to know what's going to come. You want to know how God is going to give you that prayer.
No.
And
that's right.
You better fashion you better construct that sentence.
That's right. You construct it like, God, give me wisdom in an easy way.
In an easy way. Well, don't make that hard. Don't make it crazy. I want to get to where I want to get to. And so I've always wanted to ask anybody of the Islamic faith. I actually wanted to ask Hakeem this question. Is it hard to play during Ramadan and combining your faith with your professional career? Like, how do you play basketball in the playoffs while you're fasting? You know, things like that, having to observe the prayers. How does that work?
You know, there's a struggle with everything. Without struggles, as we've been having this conversation all in this podcast, right? We don't necessarily grow and excel in the best of ways. But me, man, the fasting, is it hard to play when you're fasting? You get accustomed to it. That the eating and drinking, the not eating and drinking, becomes the easiest part, provided that you don't have some physical condition that prohibits you from fasting. But to not actually, and Hakeem ended up corroborating the story. He used to didn't fast on game day, and when he came to a game in Denver, we were talking. I said, "Man, we ended up getting in the car together." I said, "I got to get something to eat." He said, you fasted? I said, yeah, I fast. That's all I know because I just came into Islam, right? I didn't know about all the exceptions. He said, well, how does it make you? I said, man, let me tell you something. My focus is on a whole nother level. My energy is on a whole nother level. Wow. You would think that you'd be drained. I would come out of the game and still not hungry, but you know you got to break your fast because that's a mercy, right? And I told him, he said, man, I'm going to start fasting. And so he started fasting. And that particular year, I think, or the next, they came out with a report on CNN. It was one of those channels. And they were talking about Ramadan and the players in the NBA or whatever that's fasting. And they brought up Hakeem and my numbers. And they said during Ramadan, our numbers had increased in every category. You know, so for me, fasting enhances. It becomes, we look for Ramadan every year because we know the benefits that's going to come from it. Yeah, so the focus and the energy is off the chain. You just got to get through the first, depending on the person, right? 2, 3 days, 4 days, and you're going to be, it's a whole nother ballgame.
Wow. All right, now we're going to get into the meat of your story. In 96, you make headlines for not standing up during the national anthem. Form of protest, you stated that the flag was a symbol of oppression. My question is a tough one. If you could go back in time, would you do it again?
I'm doing it now. So nothing has changed. Yeah, I would definitely do it again. It's easy to have the luxury of hindsight, right? Would I like to say that I would have did things differently? I would have loved to say that. In terms of having a network together, a better plan. For example, sort of like what Kaepernick did, right? He had a team, and they ended up putting together a Know Your Rights campaign, right? They ended up doing things and sending food on a plane to Somalia. right? They had, it seemed, had a great team to where they could organize things to come off of that. I didn't have that necessarily. I had people, but we didn't have that network of thinking to do it, even though I was doing my thing. But it's good to be able to do things publicly and privately. Not everything you do have to be public, right? It's a balance. But I never stopped. Just because the focus, the media stopped paying attention, I never stopped the momentum of doing what I was doing after all of these years. And like anything, the more you practice, it becomes easier. And those things that people concern themselves with, the risk of losing a job, the risk of, losing finances, the risk of life, it becomes easier the more you study, the more you analyze who you want to become and this life that you live in. It becomes easier to make those moves every single day. So I would definitely do it because I'm doing it now.
What do you think about, and you just mentioned Colin Kaepernick. When you think about it, he also, this is 20 years and maybe also almost 30 years later, he did the same thing, similar things where he didn't want to stand for the national anthem and he got criticism, but he also got some support.
Yeah.
What did you think? And when you saw his story, did you feel like did you feel like you were living that whole thing over again? And what did you see as a difference in both your cases?
Well, it's definitely, you see parallels, which is why as soon as I saw it, I ended up sending, because I had no means of getting in contact with him at the time. I sent something on social media, say, I support you 1,000%. And I pretty much know the playbook of what was going to happen to him. There's going to be a diminishing of minutes. There was going to be the condemnation of him, making him look like he's ridiculous and crazy for having having those views. They were going to attach his fame and money, associate that with, like, when said, well, how can you be oppressed? How can you feel this way? And you making all of this money. So, and then slowly his career was going to be over, because this is the same playbook that happened with me, right? And they're going to use the media to continue to push this narrative, which is why I immediately sent my support out to him. But history has shown, even before him, there's always somebody that comes before, and unfortunately, but fortunately, there will be people that come after, because we'll always have. I don't think we'll ever live in a society where there's going to be a pluralistic, monolithic expression of freedom in the practical sense of the word, right? Where everybody's going to be this utopia. Everybody's going to be. You're going to always have your criminals. You're going to always have your racists. You're going to always have those things. So I just saw it as, hey, every so many years we have these types of people like Kaepernick, like we had John Carlos and Tommy Lee, we had Muhammad Ali, and countless others that's going to take a risk, right, with their life and their career to say what's right and to try to do what's right. And so I'm always going to applaud that, no matter how small or how big the stand is, when anybody, irrespective of what their religion is, their color is, their gender is, I'm always applaud that, because we need more of it. And so that was my mind.
I'm happy you brought them up, because you think about Lou Alcindor changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. You think Cassius Clay changed his name to Muhammad Ali. And when you see these people and you see the criticism that they took as they were taking their stands in the social justice reforms, did that inspire you? Did that deter you and make you feel like, man, maybe I'm not doing this right? What did you feel when you saw these people?
No, with me, man, I was blessed to be inspired by it. The intelligence, that they had, and their ability to articulate what's wrong, but having the strength to go against the grain, man, it takes enormous amounts of courage, right, and faith. And if you are in any way conscious or logical in your thinking, who wouldn't want to have, right, that type of faith and conviction and understanding and strength to be able to do that? So many people are, and we know it, man. There's a saying by Waldo Emerson: "Wherever you go, there you are."
You are,
right?
yeah.
We can run from people, right? And we can pretend with people, but we can never pretend with ourselves. We can't lie to ourselves. You know, if you was a coward, you know, if there was something you should have stood for that you ain't stand for it. We know many of us are living to survive, but we're not living, right? We're surviving, just getting by. And so I'm looking at them. I'm like, man, these people are living. It's like they are free, right? They're not imprisoned and shackled by the materialism and by the wealth and by the fame, right? And what they're saying is actually valid and true. And so for me, I'm like, no, that's what I want to be. Because George Washington Carver said, no one has the right to come into this world and leave it without leaving behind distinct and legitimate reasons for having passed through it. So what greater thing to leave than a legacy of speaking the truth, standing up for justice, even if it's against yourself. And these are the people, when we look back, they may not have been appreciated when they were living. But look at how now, you know, Muhammad Ali and all of these people are honored, and they always go back to the positions that they took, right? And applaud those positions. Not that you're looking for that, but these are the people we end up admiring the most. Like if you're talking about real change, no offense to us, right? We play basketball. But who's more important, if we want to be real technical, who's more important to the world, basketball players or educators? But
okay, that's an
I mean,
argument.
we can pay a lot of money. Doesn't mean that we can't educate. Doesn't mean that we don't have influence. But if we say the children are our future, right? And we really invest in those children as our future, right? There are a lot of different professions. Like if they retired my jersey at LSU, prime example. What do you think? I said, I'm grateful. I said, but if I'm gonna be honest, and I'm always be honest, even if it hurts, I said, if God wills, I said, listen, I'm grateful that people appreciate those things. You know, God blessed me to be able to entertain people. I said, but if this is all what people remember, that's a wasted life to me. I said, because I can't go on the day of judgment and say, God, I averaged 30.1 a game. Boy, I tore them up. That's going to be irrelevant on the day of judgment. What's going to be relevant is my character, my truthfulness, how I stood up for this, how I denounced this. You know, did I show love and consideration? That type of thing. So this is what I mean when I say, which one is more, right?
This is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that Mahmoud mentioned that quote. That was probably my favorite quote that you shared in the whole film, which is why I ended the movie with that quote. And one of the things, Festus, that I did in the film was it's a filmmaking technique that we don't use a lot. It's called breaking the fourth wall, where you have someone look at camera. And the very last shot of the movie, I leaned on that footage because I had this idea. I brought Mahmoud to Game 6. We filmed during the national anthem. I wanted to see that on camera today, 26, 27 years later. Mahmoud did not stand, and we filmed it, and it's part of the end of the film. And the message in breaking the fourth wall, the very last shot where Mahmoud is looking at the camera, it's kind of this idea of, well, what are you going to do? Like putting it back out to the world. And Mahmoud can make this stand. We can all do these things in our lives, but there is a reminder there of that we all have a responsibility to take a stand in our own lives for different things that matter to us. And hopefully this film will help people remember that too.
Man, I have. So when I was coming on to the podcast, Chris Mullen is my guy. We do the show together. I have so many questions that people wanted me to ask you. And I have 15 minutes to ask a few more questions, but we might have to do a part 2 of this podcast because, man, your life is so inspiring, and the way that you're a principled human, it to me is very inspiring. One thing I do notice, and even in watching the documentary, is that even the religious leaders, they disagreed with your stance. Shaq even said on there, he was quoted there, he said, sometimes you just have to play the game, and talking about how you adhere to the rules of the organization. Did you feel isolated? Did you feel misunderstood during your protest?
Oh, of course. There's definitely those moments. Uh, and some of that is the media's fault because they'll sometimes take your words out of context and they'll focus on one thing and won't give breath to the other things that you said, even with the tyranny and oppression part, right?
Ooh.
But don't mention the other things that bring balance to that statement. Um, and I wasn't surprised because most of us, let's just face it, it's unfortunate. Most of us oftentimes either we're not going to get it because we're so inundated, man, and indoctrinated with, you know, someone else's version of history and how they see it, and we don't really research and analyze for ourselves and think for ourselves. Um, and then there's some people that they're going to understand, but they're going to be silent about it. And when it's public, it's time to say something publicly. They're going to say something different, but in private, in the barbershops, in the locker rooms, they're going to say something because there's a fear there, and I understand it. Not that I agree with it, but I understand it. There's a fear of losing your job. You work
Losing.
most of your life for this, and everybody wants to take care of their family. But this is what the system understands too, and this is what when we fail to collectively come together, they got us, right? And what we allow, as your sister Yasmin will say, what you allow will continue. And as long as we keep with that and we become silent and we don't collectively come together and we become like Ubuntu, I am because we are philosophy, then we'll constantly be going through this same cycle, which is every 10, 15 years, we're going to have an entertainer, an athlete, or somebody that break the norm and say, I'm tired of this. We need a change. And then there's going to be the same cycle and playbook.
My question, everybody remembers where they were when 9/11 happened. I was in Nigeria when it happened.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it affected Muslims, not just in America, it affected people all over the world. Tell me how it changed things in your community, whether it's for you, but just in the Muslim community as a whole.
You know what, man? When 9/11 happened, it's almost akin to when the pandemic happened, right? You know, people have views about it, but the dominant story, right? If you keep hearing CNN and MSNBC and all of these things saying one thing, it's very hard to be the oddball and to have a counter story that may come off sounding like a conspiratorial thing, but it could actually be true, and to present other ideas. So a lot of people will continue to, regurgitate the same old thing. And I'm trying to think of the question you asked. I lost my train.
How did 9/11 affect you and the Muslim community?
Right. So for me, I was in Mississippi at the time, I think, and we had established an Islamic center, and I was the imam for about 4 years. So people were on eggshell, in the community, and it was high alert because now there's this attack, and you're targeting now a Muslim population, right? Say, well, the Muslims did this, they committed this, and so a lot of people were losing their lives, as a result of that. People just taking issues into their own hand out of emotions. And so we were on high alert, man. And then they were concerned. Communities were concerned about how are you going to deal with this? You know what I mean? Because no one wants to have to go through, again, losing their job, having their life threatened. And so this was the climate during that time. But for me, I'd already made a decision, my brother, that, you know what, man, none of us gonna make it out of here alive. And I want to control the way I go as much as possible. And I got a choice. Either I'm gonna go off, if I'm gonna leave here on a better truth, right, with a free conscience and a free soul, or I'm going to be like a lot of other people and I'm gonna be silent, I'm gonna say nothing, I'm just gonna survive. I don't want that life for myself. And so I made a choice that, if you ask me a question, I got something to say, I'm gonna say it. Because God is in control. whatever God has for me, there's nothing you can do about it, right? To keep it from me. And whatever he don't want for me, there's nothing you can do about it to give it to me. I live with that philosophy.
I always say, like, what is for you will find you. It really is true. And
yeah, that's right.
Your life after basketball. That's the part that I'm really interested in because, that's rebuilding the beast. Did you land on your feet? Did you stumble? How was life after basketball?
Man, God has blessed me to still be on my feet, regardless of the economic setbacks, regardless of the physical setbacks, the emotional challenges, man. I am so grateful to be here. For every challenge I get, and this is a philosophy in Islam. Allah says, most surely I will test you with hunger, worldly goods, loss of lives, and labor's fruit. But give good news to those who are patient in adversity. And when they're confronted with calamities, they say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To God do we belong, and to God shall we return. He won't give you a burden that you can't bear. With every difficulty comes ease. So every time he hits you with a challenge, he reinforces it with something good. Always. So this has been my philosophy, even when I was younger, but even after becoming Muslim, even more so. So I'm hit with something. It don't mean, okay, that's wrong. I don't like it. I'm going to confront it. But also I'm thinking about always, okay, what's the solution? What is there to be grateful for? Right? I'm always focusing because there's always more to be grateful for. Right? And so that's kept me in a very positive place, even though, yeah, we're going to get angry. It's necessary to confront issues, but it doesn't mean you have to be drowned in them to the point where you can't enjoy relationships. You can't laugh. You can't smile. It's all about the balance, the mizan. And so I'm always trying to be mindful of that. So I'm very much on my feet.
Yeah. Okay. My favorite question is my final question this time. And you got to come back for a part 2 of this podcast after the documentary comes out. My favorite question is, what would you tell your younger self if you could? Now, after you've been through everything and now you want to advise younger Mahmoud, what would you say to him?
It wouldn't just be one thing. We don't have enough time on this podcast. I would tell myself a lot, but man, you know what? I'm trying to think of something that I wasn't telling myself. That's a tough one, and I don't want to rush that one. But a lot of the things I would reiterate what I was telling myself then. Make sure that that God is first, middle, and last in your life. Right? That relationship is the most critical of everything that you do because that's going to set the foundation for everything else in your life. How you approach family, how you approach friends, how you approach work, right? How you approach rest, how you approach eating. Because for us, Islam governs everything we do. Everything. Not that we're perfect, but it governs everything from how we talk to each other, how we look at each other, how the passion we put into our work, the rest that we get, right? Everything. So I would constantly reiterate that day in and day out because I was that little child that walked the street constantly in prayer, constantly praying also for others, oftentimes more than for myself. It's kind of like the saying, if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. The goal in life is to find your gift. The purpose in life is to give it away because the more you do, more comes back to you in so many ways.
I think I would remind myself that where you trip is your treasure, and Mahmoud's story is a reminder of that. But, oftentimes, like growing up, if I could have just had someone reminding me that where things are hard is where you're going to grow, and that's where your strength will come from. So
that's beautiful. What do you want us to know from this movie, Joslyn? What do you want us to take away from this with this documentary?
That's a great question, Festus. I think it would be that the Mahmoud's story is really, I always say this, but like I see Mahmoud as an alchemist. And I think that all of us have the potential to be alchemists in our lives, to transform the tin, the copper, the metals, the impurities, the shadows into our light, into our gold. And I want the parts of Mahmoud's life that were left out of focus from the media and to the world to be seen through that lens, that Mahmoud can be an example of alchemy.
Wow. Thank you both so much for this. I'm blown away, Mahmoud. It's really nice to meet you. Hopefully I get to meet you in person soon. But man,
Nice
thank
to
you
meet
for what you've done for us, for our game. It's a whole lot better because of you came in and you were a part of it. So I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you even more, man, and nothing but the best always.
Thank you all for listening to Mahmoud's episode on the podcast. But to really get the full picture of his story, you got to go watch the documentary, Stand, by Showtime. Thank you to Joslyn Rose Lyons for also pulling up and really showing us what she was trying to tell, the story she was trying to tell. Mahmoud is an incredible human, and it's a really emotional story. I can't wait to finish this interview. I know we were cut short due to time constraints because this story is so deep and there's so much more. I want to talk to him about Steph Curry and what he thinks about today's NBA. So many more questions. But thank you all for listening to the podcast. I hope that you know that I want to share these stories. I want to continue to share stories so we can understand that everybody has a rebuilding story. Hope we can learn from their stories. And please don't forget to hit subscribe, rate the podcast so that we can keep getting more incredible guests. Keep getting more incredible guests just like Mahmoud. All right, till next time, stay blessed.
Hey, Festus here. I hope you liked that episode. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and here's some more episodes that you might like. On this side.